Seek, Go, Create podcast. This is Tim Winders, your host. I'm a coach for business owners, executives, and leaders. My wife and I consider ourselves nomads. We currently live, work, and travel in a 39-foot RV. Today, very unique though, I am actually recording this from my old family home just outside of Atlanta. So I am not in my RV like I usually am. So kind of different for me, different setup. One thing I'd love for you to do is make sure that you listen to the end of the podcast. We will include ways that you can continue the conversation we start today by connecting directly with us. Today, we have Perry Marshall as our guest, and Perry's an old connection. We haven't connected in a long time, so I am really looking forward to our conversation today. Perry is one of the most, and this is his words, most expensive business strategists in the world. He is endorsed in Forbes and Inc. magazine. He's guided clients like FanDuel and Infusionsoft, which I think is now Keep, from startup to hundreds of millions of dollars. His Google book laid the foundations for the $100 billion pay-per-click industry, and Ultimate Guide to Google Ads is the world's best-selling book on internet advertising. Marketing maverick Dan Kennedy says, and Dan's our buddy here, if you don't know who Perry Marshall is, unforgivable. Perry's an honest man in a field rife with charlatans. He's consulted over 300 industries, has a degree in electrical engineering, and he also lives in Chicago. Perry, welcome to the Seek, Go, Create podcast.
Good to see you, Tim. I haven't seen you in quite a while, and
Yeah.
I'm glad to be on your podcast, and we're going to ricochet on all kinds of topics today. So
yeah,
we'll probably put some money in people's pockets and probably go down some interesting roads.
I absolutely believe that too, because one of the things I was going to finish up with this question, but I just want to go ahead and say this to everyone else. One of the things that I admire about Perry is that I know he is a thinker, and he spends time thinking about things, which means he has the ability to converse about many topics. And so I think we're going to have fun with that. One of the first questions, Perry, I love to ask though, is just kind of, especially we're in business space, I think people need to kind of know this. What's your elevator pitch? You and I get on an elevator. I don't even know if we could get on an elevator now with all that's going on in the world, but let's just say we could get on an elevator. We got about 5 stories, and I look over, I say, hey, what do you do? What do you tell people?
I reinvented the 80-20 principle, which is probably the most powerful thing they never told you in school. Everything just about in the world is 80-20. 80% of your money comes from 20% of your customers, and 80% of your headaches come from 20% of your employees, and 80% of your product line creates 20% of your profit, and 20% of your product lines makes 80% of your profit. Well, it's not just true once, it's actually true over and over and over and over again. So 20% of the 20% is 80% of the 80%, and 1% of your customers generate 50% of your sales. And so I've found that if I can teach somebody enough grounding in 80-20, they can walk into any business, anywhere, and start fixing stuff. And it doesn't really even matter whether we're in the sales department, the marketing department, the accounting department, the manufacturing department, or the management, or the employees, or HR, or whatever. And so my claim to fame is I first applied 80-20 to Google advertising. I opened my first Google account about 2 months after Google started making that available. So it was brand spanking new. Nobody really understood what it was. And nobody really thought Google was a big deal either back then. In 2002, Google was just another one of these quirky little companies that might go out of business any day now, right? But I opened that Google account and I started experimenting it, and I thought, this is a giant 80-20 machine. And if I can figure out exactly where the levers are, I can eliminate about 95% of the wasted time and effort and everything. So I think that's how you and I became friends, at least in some degree. It had something to do with me doing Google advertising, and I have a Facebook advertising book and an 80/20 book. And there's really no end to the adventures and rabbit holes that you can go down when you start fixing things. So that's what I do.
Right. Excellent. And I had on my notes for us to really dive into that, but I'm going to go ahead and ask a few questions related to it, and then we may circle and veer back to it. But what was going on that forced, allowed, stars aligned, luck, God's hand intervened, whatever, what was going on that positioned you at that place at that time for Google is, 2 months in, and because that really that was a defining moment for Perry, don't you think?
Oh yeah. Well, so I remember this day vividly. It was March of 2003, and I had just got done reading Richard Koch's book, The 80/20 Principle, which I think everybody should read. It's a basic foundational business book. It's brilliant. Well, on page 14, he makes this sort of throwaway comment, and he says, 80/20 has a lot to do with fractals and chaos, which is like, if anybody knows like what the butterfly effect is. I'm like, oh, 80/20 is a butterfly effect thing? Whoa. Well, I knew a bunch of stuff about that. So all of a sudden, these two worlds collided. And I was like, oh, wait a second. That means it's not just there's these two groups of things. There's actually a whole continuum, and it's actually a calculus formula, but I can't figure out what it is. So all day long, I was obsessing about, because I'm an engineer, like, well, if I could get this down to a formula and then I could stick it in a computer and then, or a spreadsheet or something, and then we could do all these cool things with it. What's the formula? And I was stuck. And so this was on a Friday. And I remember I was obsessing about two things that day. The other thing I was obsessing about was I had done a teleseminar, like before webinars. Webinars didn't exist back then. And I had sold $11,000 of stuff in 1 hour, which completely blew my circuits. You ever have one of those moments in your early entrepreneur career, like, oh, my caveman discovers fire? And I was like, whoa, light socket. Whoa. And I was thinking, I wonder if I could use my business to help this little project in Mozambique. My wife had, I think she'd just either been there or was about to go or something. They had this like school and a church and a feeding program, and they had like people dying of AIDS and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, wow, like $1 goes a really long way in Mozambique. I wonder if I could turn that crank a little more. And so I was thinking about calculus in Mozambique all day long. Well, there was this music thing at church, and my wife told me to go to it. So I just went, and so they're playing this sort of Pink Floyd-y kind of music, and I'm just in La La Land, and there's not really a program or anything. It's just music, and I was enjoying myself, and I was just lost in thought. And I was thinking about calculus, and I was thinking about Mozambique. And I look up, and this woman is making a beeline for me. She's black. I've never seen her before. I have no idea who she is. She walks right up to me and she says, "Hi, my name is Vivian, and the Lord gave me a word for you." Now, I have heard of things like this. I have never had anything like this happen to me before.
So this was a first for you. You didn't hang out in the deep Pentecostal spiritual circles.
No,
that played Pink Floyd type music.
This church was kind of into that stuff. I was sort of new there. Everywhere I come from, it was either don't talk to us about that or don't ask, don't tell. But like nobody's going there anywhere where I was before. Okay. And so she goes, the Lord gave me a word for you. And I thought, well, this should be interesting. And she goes, the Lord told me that you're very good at math and you're working some kind of equation, some kind of formula, some kind of invention, and you're going to figure it out. Just keep working on it. You're going to figure it out. And I just looked at her like, whoa.
Because you hadn't said anything to anyone, right? It wasn't like you were walking around.
No, I hadn't said a word about this to anybody. Okay. And I looked around and I remember doing math in my head. I don't know, there's about 35 people here. What's the chances of walking into the building and picking, like, how many people are thinking about math right now? One.
Yeah. Zero other than you, right?
Zero other than me. And like, this immediately got my attention. And then she turned to walk away, and then she spun back around. She goes, oh, and he told me something else too. You want to support missions, and God is going to bless your business so you can support missions. And now I just stared at her, and I was almost in tears because, like, she punched me in the face twice in like 30 seconds. And all I could manage to do was say, if only you knew. And she goes, he knows. And she just walked away. And I stood there and I thought, did that just happen? Dang, like, that really happened. Like, that was a bona fide memo from the head office. I wasn't talking about anybody about any of this stuff. And so it's like, well, that so seriously got my attention. So, okay, so what happened next? Well, I kept working on that formula, and I would pull it out and get stuck and put it away and pull it out and get stuck and put it away. 3 years later, I finally figured it out. And it's now the backbone of my 80/20 sales and marketing book. It was published 2 years ago in Harvard Business Review. The actual math part. During the next couple of years after that happened, my business went supernova. It probably grew 400, 500%. All of a sudden, like, I'm getting speaking invitations in Australia and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. And I looked back in my email box of like, wow, that was on a Friday, or March 23rd or something like that. What other stuff was going on then? And I found that 3 days before, I had gotten an email from a guy named Ken McCarthy, and we were discussing Google advertising. And he asked me, who should I get to speak at my seminar on Google advertising? And I gave him a name of somebody. And he goes and talks to that person, and he comes back to me and he goes, well, Andrew turned me down. I think you should speak at my seminar on Google advertising. And as soon as he said that, I was like, oh, so that means like, that puts me on the seminar circuit. It means I got to like have something to sell. It means blah, blah, blah. I need to write some kind of a book. So I started writing what is now Ultimate Guide to Google AdWords, which will be in its 6th edition this fall coming out. And it's sold about 100,000 copies. And all of that sprang from this prophetic person showing up, total stranger. I found out much, like literally 10 years later, I found out who she was. It took a while. It took 10 years to find her, actually. She had been invited there she was on a nonprofit board of directors. Some other member of the board was like, my son's playing music, Vivian, you've got to come. And she's like, whatever, I'll get this guy off my back. And she's never been here before. She doesn't know who any of these people are. she says that she was getting like poked by the head office. You need to go talk to that guy. And she's like, I'm not going to go talk to that guy. I don't want to talk to this guy. And they're having this little argument. And so that like totally changed my life. Like I can't even tell you. And so ever since, what I call memos from the head office have been a regular part of how I run my life. You know, when to the extent that clients are open to working with that sort of thing, we go down that rabbit hole. I'm working on a book that'll be out later this year called Memos from the Head Office, which is, I don't know, it's about 16 or 18 stories that from myself and a whole bunch of other people talking about that. And you know, there's a scripture that says, if any man lacks wisdom, ask. And what I believe is if you're humble and you ask for help, you get help. If you ask for wisdom, you get wisdom. So yeah, so that's, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's why people know who Perry Marshall is. It's because that happened.
So many things from that have been catalysts. And then a lot of things that we don't know are things that led up to that. I've always said that we have these catalytic moments in our lives, but in reality, there were a lot of pieces that came together right there during that time. You know, we've heard some of the great masters literally had divine you know, inspiration for the great paintings and inventions and Einstein and others like that. So, so that's what you're talking about, correct?
Well, yeah. And, you know, the Greeks believed in the muse. The Greeks believed that, you know, that creative ideas and inspirations came from the outside. Well, I believe that's true. And like J.K. Rowling was like sitting on a train that was stalled somewhere in London, and she got this kind of 2-hour download of a kind of a jumbled Harry Potter story. And she started writing it, like it all just sort of came to her, and it was all in her head, and she managed to like pull it out of her head and get it into outline form. And then, I mean, I think she worked on it for 7 years or something, but it came almost all at once. And then later I heard there was a lawsuit from somebody in New York who had written a very similar story at about the same time that she was writing that. And a judge determined they couldn't find any indication that there had ever been any cross-pollination between the two, which would suggest, I mean, I've heard people say this just sort of offhandedly. Like I remember Yannick Silver saying, you know, I believe that when you get an idea in the shower, there's like 6 other people in the world that got the same idea on the same day. And now it's a race to see like who can do it. And there's a book called What Technology Wants by Kevin Kelly, where he's got a whole chapter that actually talks about that. Like how many people were working on an airplane all at the same time, and the Wright brothers actually beat all the other ones to the punch. And so like, I don't know how it works. Okay. I know one thing I do know is the world is a lot more sophisticated than just a bunch of billiard balls banging around in the universe. I know that. There's no question. There's layers and layers of what's going on.
Yeah.
And a lot of it defies scientific modeling. Yeah. Even though I want to make a very clear distinction, it can be scientifically verified. Like you can verify things happen that you cannot explain. And my experience with Vivian is an example. Okay, I don't have a laboratory that can tell you how that works, but I definitely have an experience. And A person with an experience is never at the mercy of a person who has a theory or lacks a theory, right? So, experience, there's nothing like an experience, man.
It isn't, but so there's a couple of things that are kind of firing in my brain as we're having this conversation, and I want to say we went deep earlier than I thought we would, but I'm cool with that. Are you cool with that?
I'm easy.
So yeah, I had some questions like, oh, are you from Nebraska and all that, blah, blah, blah. I forget all that. We're going deep. So I was in a camper van in the middle of the North Island of New Zealand with my wife. It was during winter. We were on Tongariro National Park. And it was dark. It was winter. We were there kind of off season. We were going to be living there for about 3 months. And we were nomads at the time, basically homeless nomads from some downfall of businesses.
Okay.
And we had been just spending massive amounts of time crying out to the Lord, pleading, asking why, and in some ways feeling sorry for ourselves, like some of us are prone to do. But Perry, I was meditating on a scripture, and it had a good bit to do with money and some of the things that are some things that I've had to wrestle with, which is I pursued money a little more vigorously than I should have pursued some other things in life. But I'm not going to give it all away here, but I'm laying there in this van. It gets dark at 4:30. So my wife and I are just going to sleep early. We're kind of doing some things. And then all of a sudden I get this thought about it. It's really from a scripture of someone who came into contact with Christ. And it's one in all of our Sunday school lessons in church world. We've always spoken poorly of this person because of the way they responded. And I'm sitting there thinking about it going, what happened with this person after they interacted with Christ? And I felt the Lord say, well, no one is changed that comes across Christ. And so what it led to, though, is a novel that I've just finished, and it's in edit and things like that. And, and I don't know if it'll be a whatever, but novels were not really in my wheelhouse. That's not, I'm an engineer also, I'm a guy that would have written a leadership training or something like that, not a novel like an Og Mandino type Greatest Salesman in the World type thing. So,
yeah.
So I bring that up, and then I'm going to follow it up with a question that I would have in my mind if I were listening to this conversation. And that is, looking back, we can talk about the date, March 2003. But what can we do to be proactive about situations like that instead of it happening and us only knowing about it afterwards? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, so I obviously wasn't looking for that to happen that day, which, I love the beautiful surprises that happen in life. But once that happened, my radar was on. And I had a friend who liked to say, he had a great saying, his name was Tom Hubyar. He said, there's burning bushes everywhere. Okay. I think that the world, the universe, the earth, God, all of the above, I'm not mixing them all together. Okay. I'm saying there's all kinds of different channels of communication that are happening all the time. By definition, we're only aware of, how many thousands of things are going on right in this room? And I'm talking to you, and I'm not thinking about, the paper in that book is decomposing or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can only focus on so much, but I think when you start to ask questions like, okay, what am I not paying attention to that I need to pay attention to? And where can I get more where is there more where this came from? Okay, now there's lots of versions of this. Like, okay, here's a really pedestrian example. I read Richard Koch's 80/20 book, and I didn't go back and read all the rest of Richard's books for years later.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when a book is that good, you might want to go read their other stuff. Okay, now, like, this is incredibly obvious, right? But look, the same thing's true with Vivian. Like, well, if something like that happens to you, well, you got to know there's like people who do that sort of thing. In fact, a few months later, I was telling some guy about this. And it turned out he was the guy whose son was playing in the band that asked her to come in the first place. So I kind of accidentally bumped into him. And he goes, "Oh, you had a Vivian moment. She does that to everybody." Okay. Well, interestingly enough, Tim, right now with COVID going on and plus a bunch of other things, as of late, my church is me, Vivian, and 2 other people on a conference line on Sunday mornings at 10 o'clock. And we just are a little
Y'all just
community.
bounce. Y'all just bounce off each other, right?
Right. Okay. And that's like, this must be going on God knows how many places. In fact, just about everybody I know who's a serious person of faith has just kind of spontaneously put together. It's like, man, you know, I need some soul time. Let's all, maybe it's on Wednesday morning, or maybe it's on Saturday afternoon or whatever, but man, like we gotta open up some space. We gotta pray. We gotta just drink in some goodness. The 4 of us, we've been praying for neighborhoods in the city of Chicago, different things like that. Right. And it's like you start pursuing things. Or like 3 years later, I went to a prophetic conference because I'd seen a couple more things. And like this, they got me really curious. I'm like, what is going on here, man? This is like the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Right. And then I go down that rabbit hole. And so, you know, I just think there are certain things, they sort of have your name on it. And I think sometimes we're afraid, oh, well, gee, if I go down that rabbit hole, I might get too extreme, or I might be too obsessive. Well, guess what? If you have an obsessive personality, which almost all entrepreneurs do, you're going to be obsessing about something all the time. I don't care.
Right.
You know, it's just a matter of what. So you need to pick the right what, and then obsess about that. And then at least have a healthy obsession instead of an unhealthy obsession. You know, and if you got good people around you and you get too carried away, somebody will conk you on the head.
Yeah, there's plenty of things that will make a correction. So anyway, all right. So you fast forwarded, so I'm going to fast forward also. We are right now recording this during summer, and there's many things going on in the world. And later, I'm going to get to something really cool, which is some predictions you made at the end of 2019, which I stumbled across the video, and it was super cool when I was doing some research. But one thing that I want to ask the people watching this on Facebook Live, they're going to get it obviously real time if they listen to it anytime during that time. But as the podcast releases, it'll probably be late summer 2020. So whenever people are listening to this, we could almost guarantee there's a lot going on, because it's almost like there's a momentum of really weird stuff happening. Yeah. And so what I want to do is I want to kind of pause, and I want to tap into your brain power and that prophetic and the memos from the head office. And I'm all into what you're talking about also. In fact, I'm on the board, and I coach a guy who's like a Vivian. And that you know, Perry, he has a membership coaching program.
All right. Good for him.
That he teaches people how to hear from God. Mm-hmm. And it's a program that I've been working with him on, helping him develop, and also it's really cool. We have a
Yeah.
family foundation that we're working with ministries like that. But so I actually just had a thought. I converse with this guy multiple times and he's asking me questions. And how crazy is that, that he's the prophetic and he's asking me questions. I'm telling him things on coaching and structuring and things like that.
Yeah.
I should probably be asking him questions all the time, shouldn't I?
Well, I don't think so. Okay. Now here's what I found about like everybody, including prophetic people, is the whole human race is rock, paper, scissors.
Mm,
Okay. Like, okay, so for example, I mean, I know some crazy talented prophetic people. And so like I was talking to one of my friends about one of these folks, and he's like, hey, that guy, boy, he's got an amazing gift, but well, he went and tried this and he went and tried that, and this thing didn't work out, and that thing didn't work out. I said, look, man, just because he's prophetic doesn't mean he's God, and he doesn't mean he knows everything. In fact, my experience with a lot of, like, I've been watching people for a long time on this, is that different people have perceptions into different things, and they see some things super crystal clear, like tuning fork, right? And other things they're kind
yeah.
of fuzzy about. Some people, they seem to be very good at political issues and global things, and some people are very good at like reading your mail, and some people are very good at discerning certain spiritual things, and it's like they all got their own sort of radio station going on, right? And so it doesn't surprise me a bit that this guy who has such clear perception in one department is totally, it's just like, I'm a very creative person and I'm analytical and I can do all this stuff. The last thing you want me to do is administrate. I hate administration.
Yeah.
Well, you could go, but you're an electrical engineer. That's just logic. I know it is. And my wife, like, she wakes up in the morning and her spreadsheet of where the kids are going to go and all this stuff starts spinning. It drives me crazy, right? And so, oh, it's just logic. Well, yeah, okay, but not really.
Yes.
And so that doesn't surprise me a bit. And in fact, the most gifted people are almost always, if you'll excuse the expression, a little savant-like. The people with the most brilliant perception of one area can be, trying to cross the street in the middle of traffic, picking their nose and not noticing the bus is getting ready to run them down. In fact, I remember being told that Einstein literally needed somebody to lead him across the street because he was so lost in thought. Well, I have some absent-minded professor myself, so not surprising, Tim, at all. Not at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. That's good. So, and it's probably another confirmation on why we need to communicate with each other, why we need to gather like you and Vivian and your other folks are, and, masterminds and business consult, why we need to be intentional about communications. Because what I believe a lot of people do is they isolate themselves. I did it for a season when we were going through some business struggle, and it was a big mistake. I needed to reach out to people and converse instead of isolating.
Well, I think one of the best things about any faith community, but especially a small one. Well, one of the great things about any faith community, it is almost by definition an interdisciplinary thing, okay? You go to any church of any size, there is a butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker, a surgeon, a professor, a garbage man, a policeman, like every kind of, right? But when you get in small ones, because big ones are hierarchical, inevitably, right? There's always, and there's the big pastor and all that, but like, I was part of let's call it an arts church for about 3 or 4 years. And we had like 15 to 30 people that would show up. And I remember there was this guy named Bob. Bob was, so I'm a sophisticated business consultant and I'm a famous author and all this kind of stuff. Bob drives a 15-year-old beat up Toyota. He works at Walgreens. He's in his 60s. He used to do acid. He's sober now, and he's a drummer. And he's barely duct taping his life together. Okay, like really, And sometimes the church would give him money, but you know what? I like to play drums, and Bob likes to play drums, and we'd sit there in the drum circle, and we're playing drums, and the spirit is flowing, and Bob and I are equal. And I would just sit there and go, I love that all of these titles and everything, they just go away, and we could just be in a circle.
You could just play drums.
Be human beings and just play drums.
Just play the dang drums and not
Right.
worry about Bob's background, his financial statements, or anything like that. That's
Right.
probably the kingdom of God.
Yeah. 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 And, like, in fact, I remember getting a text from Bob, and it was like, hey, I've been having some heart trouble. And it was some kind of emergency instructions, or I don't remember if it was the password to an apartment or whatever, but like he was telling like several people, like this is how close Bob is to the edge, right? And it's like, okay, because I could get hit by a bus tomorrow, just like Bob could have a heart attack tomorrow, right? Like it's the equalizer, We're all equal under God. We're all equal in the drum circle, right? And that's just that is a particular unpretentious thing that you get in a small gathering.
Yeah, you could interact with people. It's not an entertainment. It's interesting, this time that we're in right now is that many of those larger organizations have been shut down. And so they're having to restructure and do more what I term relationship versus religion. They're having to really interact with people. And you know what, Perry? Some are going to pull it off, organizations, churches, etc. Some aren't.
Yeah, that's right.
They're not going to make it. All right. So let's bring ourselves to where we are now. And I know you work with a lot of businesses, a lot of heads of organizations, companies. I know, we know where you are spiritually and how you have the thought process there. What are you seeing as we're recording in the summer of 2020 with a pandemic that could have been a black swan event for the economy, or we're not quite sure yet? We're dealing with some civil unrest, which shouldn't really surprise anyone. Mm-hmm. We're in an election year, and there are a lot of people. And again, I'm going back to what I went through in 2008. I thought that I knew what to do, but I didn't. But what are you telling people about the times that we're in right now?
So I think in 80-20 language, this is a 95-5 decade, not just a year. Okay, what do I mean by that?
Yeah, unfold that.
I mean black swan. So I did this interview in series with Bob Rigneris, 10 predictions for 2020 to 2029. If you go to perrymarshall.com/2029, you can read them. Well, they've already about half come true. And it's only 6 months later. So let me try to describe to you what was the underlying insight and logic behind those. So we've talked about 80-20. Well, another version of 80-20 is what I call 95-5. It's when 5% of the companies get 95% of the business, and 95% of the other companies get 5% of the business. So you have extreme inequality. Well, so that would be, so here's an illustration. The automotive industry is 80-20. If I go ask, the 7-year-old across the street, can you name a dozen car companies? He can name a dozen car companies. He'll think of Lamborghini and Kia and Hyundai and Honda, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, tell me 12 search engines. There aren't 12 search engines. In fact, in the whole world, you probably come up with about 6 that are really actually legitimate search engines, and the rest are all just, trivial, right?
And
okay.
the percentages outside of the top 2 are
right.
Well, Glory worked for Mozilla Firefox for a few years, and they would be in that search engine, but their percentages keep getting lower and lower, which is
yeah, right.
So
Google has 95% market share, and then everybody else is just fighting over the scraps. Okay, so that's 95-5. Okay, so the brick and mortar world is 80-20, and the internet world is 95-5. Why? Because the internet runs so fast. It's frictionless. Okay, friction increases inequality, doesn't decrease it. Okay, so when there's a lack of friction, when something can move across the world at light speed, then one company can completely dominate a market and control the lives of hundreds of millions or billions of people. So you have, what are the Facebook stats? Like, Facebook has 3 billion users, and 2 billion of them log in at least once a month, and 1 billion of them use it every day, and 100 million of them never even get off of it all day long.
Ever. Yeah.
Right? Okay.
They're watching us right. They're watching us right now.
Okay. That's 95-5. And okay, a virus spreads to some people, and then gets into an airplane, and then anywhere there's international airports, there's viruses everywhere. That is a 95-5 phenomenon, because it scales very rapidly and travels very quickly. Okay, so you are going to continue to see, this is butterfly effect on steroids, is what it is. Butterfly effect says a butterfly's wings on one part of the world can cause a hurricane 6 months later somewhere else. That's the butterfly effect. It's from chaos theory. Well, guess what? Because the world is so interconnected, one lunatic or one disaster or one bat virus or whatever, this one thing out of 1 billion can multiply incredibly. Okay, I don't see an end to it. Okay, cops abuse Black people every day, but one with the right, it was humidity, temperature, pressure, social situation, everything else perfect. You got 8.5 minutes of it on camera. There's no arguing about what happened. Kaboom. Right? And George Floyd is the most famous guy of 2020. And how long did that take? 12 hours?
Right.
So this is the characteristic pattern of the 2020s. And I wish I could tell you that it's going to stop, but it's not. And not only that, I predicted the college education bubble is going to pop. It's popping right now in slow motion. It's just nobody's noticing because all this other stuff is going on. But the college bubble has already popped.
Yeah. And I want to tie a couple of these together. We're not going to go through all of the 10 predictions that you made with a few bonuses, by the way. I'm going to recommend people go get it. But you said that Occupy Sally Mae was one of them,
Yeah.
and the resurgence of trades, which I kind of interlink those two. And
Yes.
who knew that the bubble that would pop Sally Mae would be that people weren't going to be able to actually go to a college or attend a
I didn't
football
see that
stadium.
coming.
And so people are going to realize we've got $500 million in buildings sitting here that we need to pay for. We need international students to cut the checks for this. And we can't get people to show up, and they're realizing they could sit at home and get a better education by reading Perry Marshall's books.
Which is true, unfortunately. Yeah. You know what? I got a friend who was getting ready to drop $110,000 on an MBA. I said, dude,
get this book.
Read this book. You'll get half the value of an MBA just reading this book. And he's like, no. I said, yes, you read it. Well, like 2 months ago, he sent me an email, and he'd read some article about how 20% of the COVID cases were caused by 80% of the COVID cases were caused by 20 of the people who carried COVID. He's like, this is incredible. I'm like, yeah, it's a law of nature, man. Of course it is. I told you that when we had beer 6 months ago. You didn't believe me.
Sure. So you've got Sally Mae, you've got the colleges are a bubble that's about to bust. You know, it's about to go.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I've been saying some things, not with the clarity you have, but that we need more people in trades. People are going to get these degrees. They're not really getting degrees that have, I hate to say this, value, but they don't. I mean,
it's true.
And so yeah, all of that's going on. I did want to ask one question, because there's a lot of these that would be so fun to really dive into. But what I wanted to really ask is not really future, but in my quiet time, not as scientific as what you're saying, I've been feeling as if we are in some type of famine situation. And it may not look like famine that we have, biblical or whatever, but there's famine because of that, as you worded it, there's lack of friction, which leads to high degrees of inequality. Yeah. Which is really like gasoline on some of these fires.
Yes. Oh yeah.
So, we hate to be a bummer for everyone, but what this means is things don't look good. So do you see a way that it can correct, adjust, pendulum? I know that's a word you use, a pendulum swing, or what can we do to give people hope? Maybe the best way of saying it.
So one of my beliefs is that Mother Nature does not like 95.5. In other words, a monopoly as powerful as Amazon is unnatural. Okay. I mean, like one company gets like 50% of all e-commerce. Right. That's weird. Okay. Now it's perfectly logical and perfectly understandable, and any MBA can tell you why, and so can I, but it's weird. Okay. So I believe that 95.5 systems are fragile. They break. What happens is they break catastrophically. Okay, like all of a sudden, Amazon AWS cloud services is down for 2 days because somebody hacked into it. And now Netflix doesn't work. And half of our websites, the pictures don't load or whatever. Okay. Now I teach business strategy, and I teach people to harness network effects. I teach people how to build 95.5 businesses that dominate, because you're either going to be on the winning or the losing end of that. And so I don't see any I don't see any way to put on your MBA hat and solve it. Here's what I do believe. I believe, so this is caused by frictionless e-commerce is what it's caused by. And I should know because I wrote the book on Google advertising, okay? I know how this works.
Yeah.
The solution to frictionless e-commerce and the problems that it causes is frictionless community. Basically, it's Acts chapter 2 in the New Testament. That is the only way that you solve. So my prophetic viewpoint would be that we are looking at a competition in the next 10 years. You're going to see a competition between socialism versus Acts chapter 2. Because the fact that, so Amazon is held together by network effect. Network effect is when Uber gets more riders, which gets more drivers, which lowers the wait time, which attracts more riders, which attracts more drivers, which lowers the wait time. And suddenly you wake up one day and there's no way you could ever start another taxi company. They would beat you. So network effect is the ultimate moat around Uber. Well, what that creates in society is a lack of mobility for people who are locked out. Okay? So what the internet creates is fabulously wealthy people in very small numbers, and then everybody else. I'm like, well, I got a degree in art history and all I can get is a job at Starbucks. Or all I can do is drive an Uber, but I can never own a company like Uber. Yeah. Right? Now, I'm not advocating.
And Starbucks just closed 400 locations or something. Yeah, it's like
crazy, right?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not advocating a, helpless mentality at all. I'm just observing this is how masses of people feel, okay? So you got the social justice warriors and you got Black Lives Matter and you got all this stuff going on, okay? And most of it is really well-intended desired outcomes combined with a lot of really bad strategies for how to get there. Like, oh, well, let's defund the police. Oh, you want your neighborhood ruled by mobsters and gangs? Yeah. Oh, that's a good idea. Now, I don't disagree with the problems are there at all. Not at all. I know the problems are real. I just know that you're living in a fantasy world if you think that society will run without name one country that doesn't have police. I mean,
yeah, well, to go to what the theme is the solutions are attempting to try to reverse, not adjust, but reverse the 95.5. Is that correct or no? Am I missing it?
Yeah, well, yeah, they're trying to throw rocks through the window, right?
Okay.
Well,
they're not even in the realm of 80-20, 95.5. They're just wanting to try to provide a solution that doesn't even fit.
No, I think when I wrote 80-20 sales and marketing, there's a chapter where I confront the 80-20 problem in society. Like, okay, so I've been talking to you about all these chapters about harnessing all these inequalities and these tiny levers that swing big doors. We need to stop for a while, and I need to acknowledge the problems that this creates. Okay? Because one of the things 80-20 tells you is the poor will always be with us, as Jesus said. Okay? Which I don't think he's saying it's completely impossible to eradicate poverty. Okay, but that 80-20 curve, like that math curve, that it's always there. It's everywhere, right? So it's like a law of physics. You're going to have inequality. And one of the things that I figured out is that you cannot fix inequality externally. It's never worked. Okay, the Bolsheviks didn't do it, and Pol Pot didn't do it, and Chairman Mao didn't. They all tried, and they all ended up creating a tyranny that was worse than what they started with. Okay,
Right.
The only way that you can get generosity is somebody has to want to be generous. Period. That is the only. There's only one kind of generosity, and it's free generosity. Okay, so people need to, like, look, if Jeff Bezos loves his employees and loves his fellow man, then Jeff Bezos will do great, wonderful things with his wealth. If Jeff Bezos is like, I'm gonna build myself an empire, I'm gonna be the greatest business tycoon of ever, you can tax him. If you tax him, all he's going to do is take money from his employees when he wants to go buy a yacht.
Yeah. So earlier you brought up, you made a statement. You said that where we're moving to is socialism versus Acts 2:2, which is the early church, which is a model that's always fascinated me. And what's interesting is that over the last few years, Perry, I've been looking at the coffee shop culture, the startup culture, co-working. I've been looking at a lot of things that to me has done better with some of that community. The word you used earlier was frictionless community.
Yes.
Of people that are together 24/7. They're in the group like you and Vivian, where y'all meet, y'all talk, y'all communicate, y'all get deep with each other. You reach in, you help each other, you are generous with each other. Do we have models of that currently? And if we do, where? And if not, where are they going to come from? I have a theory that they may not come from the church.
Well, I think they happen almost naturally when you have very small groups of people who come together for worship and faith. I think it's almost natural. Like, that little arts church I was talking about, I called it the tribal embryonic drum circle.
That wasn't the official marketing name, was it?
No, it was called Greater Chicago Arts was the actual name. But it was like, if you got together and, a third or half of the people are musicians, and you're just gonna connect with God and bring dinner and have some food and talk freely about what's going on in your life, it'll happen. And people crave this. Okay.
Even in social media land, I think they crave it even more now, don't you think?
Oh yeah. Oh, I think, what social media is? Social media is salt water for a thirsty person. Okay, I think social media makes people more lonely, not less. Okay, so take social media as it already is, with all the echo chambers and everything and the polarization, and then you add a pandemic. You got like the loneliest civilization you've ever seen in your life. You've got like, I don't know, I'm gonna guess like probably half the people in the world are directly affected by the pandemic. There's a lot of farmers and people out in the rural areas that really aren't dealing with it too much, but about half the world is. You got 3 billion, like 4 billion, like lonely people, and they can't go see very many people. And boy, there's a lot of, husbands and wives that should have probably got a divorce a year ago. And all that kind of stuff, man. Like, it's crazy. And
Well,
so,
it's magnifying a lot of issues that were probably already there,
yeah,
and it's happened so quick. And, you know, one concern that I have is that I know what economic and financial challenge can do to someone's soul and just their mind and soul. And we haven't even begun seeing what that's going to look like. But
no.
so what I'm going to try to do is see if I can shift a little bit.
Can I just add one thing and
Yes, sure.
hang on to your shift? I know I sound like I'm painting this really bleak picture, but I am seeing, there's something else I'm seeing.
Great.
And here's what it is. So for example, I had like a, let's call it a healing prayer session with a guy not too long ago. It's kind of like, let's call it prayer therapy. And in fact, I've had a few of these in the last couple months. And I got done, I go, Ray, that was like killer good. That was like really good. He goes, Perry, every single one that I do is like that lately. Every time. Okay. Now, I think God's up to something. I think a lot of old, decrepit, stinking, rotting, you know, like the fish stinks from the head down. There's a bunch of institutions and organizations and structures in the world. They are coming down. And nobody had the will or the strength or the wherewithal to take them down earlier. But now all of this stir fry is forcing it to happen. And I think there's a lot of good underneath this, but the bandage has to get ripped off. And I think that's where we're at. And I'm not despairing about this.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to be fine. I think my friends and clients are going to be fine. But man, this is a time to be listening to the head office and asking for wisdom like no other. Certainly not like anything that's happened in my lifetime. And if we're going to have a series of Black Swan 95.5 more events for the whole decade, you know, God help the person that thinks they're going to figure out in advance. Good luck.
Yeah. I mean,
Okay, back to you.
no, well, but that is so cool that you brought that up, because one of the things that I said when this thing first started, I said, isn't it interesting that the idols of the world are falling left and right? Yeah. Sports. And listen, I love sports. I mean, you know, let's just say anything could be an idol.
Yeah.
To someone.
Yeah.
And an idol is something that we put above God. But sports, religion, I mean, the churches closed down. A lot of them were religion, not necessarily relationship. You know, we had governments, we had entertainment is still shut down, and all of those things are shut down. And so in some of my quiet time period, I'm sitting here and I feel as if the Lord said, we're moving rapidly toward there being only two choices: my kingdom or not. You know, it's my kingdom or not. It's not like someone can do, you know, their sports and hang out and then maybe pop in church and whatever. It's my kingdom or not, which is really cool and interesting. So, well, I think we would be remiss if we didn't at least tap into your experience, your brain power, all of your background with working with businesses, and give some solid either mindset or practical advice for that business owner, entrepreneur person that maybe has an idea to start something, that's listening going, man, I'm digging all this stuff, but man, we're struggling a little bit here. We need to kind of right the ship, or we're rocking along. So can you give us a few things before we wrap up here and jump off that someone can maybe grab hold of? I do recommend highly that people go, and we'll put links in the notes and listen to those videos on all of your predictions, because you're correct. I'm looking at about 6 or 7 of them, and the others I'm with you on too. So man, you're right there. So give us some tips. Teach the business people some stuff.
Okay, so in 80/20 sales and marketing, I talk about the 5 power disqualifiers, which are John Paul Mendocha's 5 things that are always true anytime anybody buys anything from anybody. This is a valuable list of 5 things. Okay, number 1, they have the money. They're not buying your stuff if they don't have the money. I don't care if you sing Kumbaya or whatever, right? Number 1. So number 2, they have a bleeding neck. And I'm going to come back to this in about 10 seconds, okay? It's just to list the other 3 for you. They buy into your unique selling proposition. They have the ability to say yes, and not only the ability to say no, because a lot of times we sell to people that can, we're selling to the engineering guy, but we're not talking to the boss or the purchasing agent or whatever, right? And number 5, it fits their overall plans. Now, bleeding neck. Have you ever gone to the emergency room and you have a broken arm and you think you're having the world's biggest crisis, and some woman slaps a clipboard on the counter and says, "Here, fill this out.
Fill out the forms."
And then you go hold your arm for the next 2 hours with Good Housekeeping magazine until they get around to seeing you, right? It's like what you thought was an emergency, not an emergency, right? But then some guy comes in with a gunshot wound and blood is squirting out of his aorta, and they don't give him a clipboard. He's like, they rush him right into the room and they start work, and all these surgeons start appearing from everywhere. Okay. People spend money when they have bleeding necks. Okay. And this is the advice that I have for people. This is not a time to be selling great ideas or like really cool concepts or something like that. This is a time to be selling bandages for bleeding necks. Or to switch metaphors, the tide went out, everybody's swimming naked. Okay, go sell swimsuits for $20 as fast as you can. Yeah. Okay, like put swimsuits over your arm and run out to the naked swimmers. Here. Yeah. Okay, like there's way more problems now than there was 6 months ago. So go find a problem and solve it.
Yeah, some people are going to get wealthy during this time, aren't they?
Absolutely. This is when the agile people get wealthy. I mean, honestly, Tim, this stuff hits, and once I kind of got, once the sort of shock of it wore off, I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to figure out how to make money from this. I ain't coming out of this. I've already bought a bunch of stocks when they were low and sold them when they were high. That was great. Okay. Yeah, like, look, if you're fast and you're agile and you're awake, this is a great time to be making money. If not short term, I mean, short term, maybe not. Long term, absolutely. So.
Yeah, that's good. And I guess I wanted to ask, well, it's interesting, agile is one of the predictions you made for the decade, is that agility was going to be critical. Maybe the last question, I'm not sure, but last question, how can people be agile with all that's going on? And I want to ask, and I'm going to pile on with another question here. I noticed that my head had a little bit of fog in it with all that was happening, and you just referenced that. How did you get through that? And because I think it relates to agility. It's hard to be agile when we are in a fog or can't think clearly. So maybe the bigger question is, how do you think clearly when you need to think clearly?
Okay, so inspiration never comes when your fists are clenched. Okay, now a lot of us, a lot of times have plenty of good reasons for our fists to be clenched because something's awful right now. Okay? Yeah. So, yeah, like welcome to the club. So here's what I found, especially in the last 3 months. I have to carve out time in the morning, no emails, no social media, no TV, me, my notebook, and the head office.
Mhm.
And that's it. Maybe some music. I play music, but none of this input. Okay, you got to stop it. And I pray, I meditate, I listen, I get my head clear. All right, what am I actually trying to accomplish today? What's actually important? What's not? What am I grateful for? Like all that kind of stuff. Okay. On top of that, I've also found I have to find some way to recreate and make the cares of the world go away. What works for me is riding my bike and listening to music. I don't care what it is for you. It can be anything. Okay. But I have to keep my inner space intact. Like it's like in airplanes. Put oxygen mask on self before assisting child. Okay. Absolutely have to. I've had a lot of conversations with my wife, like, especially when we were really super quarantined and sort of, instead of just quasi quarantined like we are now.
Yeah.
I go, you know what, Laura? I've just spent 6 hours on Zoom. I am exhausted. I'm sorry. I can't come and play Chutes and Ladders. It'll drive me crazy if I try to do that. I got to lock myself in my library and play loud music for an hour or two, and then I'll be okay with the world.
Yeah.
And she's like, I get it. That's fine. Go listen to music, right? Like, so I don't know, what it is for you, but people need more self-care now than usual.
Right.
And you're not a narcissist for wanting that. Maybe it's video games, whatever. Okay. Just don't do self-destructive things. Like, you know what I've noticed, Tim? And we do need to wrap here, but
Yep.
I've noticed some people, they're exercising more, they're whipping their business into shape, they're cutting bad expenses, they're doing push-ups, they're riding their bike, and there's other people, they're drinking more, they're eating more Ruffles and Oreo cookies, and they're yelling at their kids,
Or
and
Netflixing or just
they're Netflixing,
binging.
they're on unemployment, they got checks from the government, so they don't really care. It's all kind of hopeless anyway, and they're just spiraling down the drain.
Yep.
And you know what? Guess who's going to have the money in about 2 or 3 years?
That's right. That's good.
Right? So, and I can't decide that for you. Only you can decide that for you. Right? Some churches are going out of business, and some people are on Zoom or a conference line having a fantastic, little virtual drum circle or whatever it is, right? And so you've always got the choice of, whether you're going to make good or bad out of this stuff. So
Yeah, that is so good. Thank you. Thank you for that, Perry. And we are up against a time here, but last couple quick things. How, and I think this actually relates to how you manage your time. How can people connect with you? You don't give out your phone number, do you?
I don't. Go to perrymarshall.com/8020.
Okay.
And buy this book for $7. So it's about 18 on Amazon, 7 including shipping on my website, perrymarshall.com/8020. I said this earlier. I told a guy who was about to get a $110,000 MBA, you read this book, you got half the value of that MBA right there. And I'm not kidding. It is a very foundational book. It'll change the way that you see everything. 80/20 sales and marketing, $7 at perrymarshall.com/80/20.
Yeah, very cool. We'll include all that down in the notes. What's next for you, Perry? Either short term, long term, or anything. What's next?
Well, I am very deep in science. I founded the largest science research prize in history. It's called the Evolution 2.0 Prize. It's $10 million. In October, I'm working on a cancer evolution conference in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with a bunch of associates who are all, like people from Harvard and the University of Chicago and places like that. And, that is my passion project. There's a lot of reform that needs to happen in science, and I'm working on that. So that's a whole other conversation, but if you Google Evolution 2.0, you'll find a whole bunch of stuff about that.
Very cool. Title of the podcast, Perry, is Seek, Go, Create. I know with your background, there's some words there that have some scriptural reference or not, but which one of those words jumps out at you? Last question, and why?
Create. Because that, to me, being an engineer, that is the part of humanity that expresses the image of God the best. God creates, as do we. So I love the create part. I love creating businesses. I love creating products. I love creating ideas. It's one of the great joys.
Excellent. Perry, thank you for joining us on the podcast today. I really appreciate you taking the time. If you would like to continue this conversation, and I would hope that you would, we encourage and welcome you to do that. Go to seekgocreate.com to comment on this episode, post, or contact us. You can also find us and communicate on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. All of those handles are Seek, Go, Create. Thank you again for joining us. We look forward to connecting with you on the Seek, Go, Create podcast in the very near future.
Thank you.
And we are off Facebook Live. Thank you, Perry. Great. I had all these things and I kind of knew sort of it wouldn't matter, but I dig that. I mean, that's the kind of stuff I dig.
Yeah, it was great. It's a great conversation. Thanks for having it.
So anyway, enjoyed it very much. My assistant will keep you updated. It may not launch until August-ish, but I think we've got all the links and everything that we need. So we'll make sure we include all that stuff and all of that. If I could do anything for you, let me know. But I think Barry Leica is he in your group or something, or?
We've connected a couple of times recently. I don't have any official thing I do with Barry, but
okay. I didn't know. I didn't know why, because I interviewed him and he goes, Barry, anyway. So, but thank you again. Have a great evening. Thank you for taking the time, and maybe we'll circle back again sometime in the near future.
All right, man. Thank you.
You bet.
Take
See you,
care.
Perry. Bye.
Bye.